All right, good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the Southern Nevada Strategic Infrastructure Development Working Group meeting to order. It's about 10:02. Jeanette, would you like to establish quorum, please?
Absolutely. This is Jeanette Hogan for the record, and I'll now call the roll. Chris Sanchez.
Here.
Dave Johnson.
Here.
Doa Ross.
Here.
Okay. Jeff Brigger.
Here.
Thank you. All right, and we have Stacy subbing for Justin Brown. Okay, on the call. Terry Sheridan.
Present and accounted for.
Thank you. Derek Armstrong. Okay. Bill Arndt.
Here.
Thank you. Rafi Festakajan.
Morning here.
Morning. Maisha Williams.
Here.
Thank you. Shawnee Coleman.
Good morning. I am here.
Good morning. Betsy Fretwell. Okay. Right. James Chrisley.
I'm here.
Thank you. Victor Way.
Yes, here.
Thank you. Michael Bolognini.
Here.
Okay, thank you. David Swallow.
I'm here.
Okay. Jennifer Taylor.
Here.
Hi. All right. Dr. Federico Saragoza. Okay. Christina Swallow.
Here.
Thank you. All right. Bradley Crawwell. Okay. Sandra Rosenberg. Jim Lawrence.
Good morning here, and Director Krall's got a conflict, so he's not going to be able to attend.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, I'll mark that down. Kristen Aviart.
Here.
Okay. Constance Brooks.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Kumad Acharya.
Here.
Okay. All right. Chris, we have quorum.
Thank you, Jeanette. Moving on to item 2, public comment. Jeanette, please facilitate.
Okay. Does anyone wish to give public comment at this time? You will be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask that you state your name clearly for the record, okay? Okay. I don't have anyone on the phone or online, and nothing written was submitted either, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Jeanette. Moving on to item 3, approval of the May 27th, 2021 working group meeting minutes. Do we have any edits or changes to the minutes as written? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the May 27th meeting?
I'll make that motion.
Who is that?
That was Jennifer Taylor.
Thanks, Jennifer. Do we have a second on the motion?
Mike Bolognini seconds.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Any abstentions? Any noes? All right, great. Moving on to item number 4, chairman remarks. First, I just want to thank everybody. You know, it's been an interesting several months here as we've gone through a legislative session. We're emerging out of the pandemic. We're trying to adjust to whatever new normal will be. And as I think back to all these meetings and the subsequent interviews we've had, if you aggregate all that time, it's well over 300 hours of work. And I understand, you know, what everybody is facing right now, how busy all of you are. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for all that you've done to contribute to this process. And I've said this individually to everybody as we've gone through a lot of our conversations, but we've gleaned a tremendous amount of, I think, very helpful and useful information that I look forward to getting out in our final report over the next couple of months. We have 1 meeting left, and that's our July 29th meeting coming up next month. And we'll use that as kind of a housekeeping meeting to address any issues that may be suggested by working group members or to answer any questions that may arise during this meeting or through subsequent meetings that we have yet to revisit before we wrap up this process and go into the drafting phase of the final report. I also want to take a few minutes to thank John Restrepo. John, you've been a great partner in all this, and this will be John's last meeting. He's actually got a scheduling conflict for our last meeting, so will be unable to join us on that one. So I wanted to just briefly say thank you. You know, it's been fun to do all the interviews with you, and then subsequently to have several offline conversations about everything that we're hearing and getting from the group. So just appreciate your hard work and dedication there, John. Today we've got a pretty robust agenda. We're trying to squeeze a lot of information into a short time, and I do apologize for that. Don't intend for it to be overwhelming. It's just we've had, through our conversations, a lot of requests to present on the agenda, so we're trying to accommodate those. I do have one small housekeeping item in that we needed to move up item 8 to item 5, so we'll hear from James Chrisley first here after my remarks. And due to the time constraints that we have and wanting to keep everybody on schedule here, I will end my remarks and move on to item number 5. I do encourage, as we've had in meetings past, if you have any questions, to please speak up, and we want to keep this as conversational and informal as possible so that we can arrive at a better dialogue. So with that, item 5, McCarran Projects Update. We have James Chrisley, Deputy Director of Aviation at McCarran International Airport. James, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for that introduction and allowing us to provide the working group an update on the not only the McCarran projects, but also on the southern, or primarily on the Southern Nevada Supplemental Report. Just for everyone's essay, also on the call with me today are Robin Armstrong. She's our Clark County DOA project manager for the SNSA, and Stephen Culverson. He's our project manager for our lead planning consultant, Recondo and Associates. I'll do a brief introduction and I'll turn it over to them for the technical briefing that you guys will receive today. But just as a brief introduction, as many of you remember, back in the early 2000s during the economic boom, the Department of Aviation with the FAA began the planning efforts for a second commercial service airport located in the Ivanpah Valley, which is, you know, just south of Jean on the east side of the I-15 corridor, just to get everyone's that are not familiar with the project. However, though, unfortunately, with the Great Recession in the late 2000s, the project was put on hold and suspended. It wasn't canceled, it was suspended and merely put on hold. And then as we recovered over the last decade, the need for the second airport became apparent again. McCarran has a finite capacity, and as we sit today, it will be unable to meet those projected commercial aviation demands of the future. And we all know that that's a key component of the economic viability of our entire region. And just to remind everyone, 50% of the visitors that visit Las Vegas do come through McCarran as we sit today, and it's a key component of getting the tourism industry or tourism dollars into our economy. But just to be clear, though, the proposed airport is supplemental. It's not a replacement for McCarran. McCarran will always continue to operate as the primary commercial service airport for the region, and our current plan in the SNSA will, as its title, will merely supplement and provide that ability to accept even more demand and growth. So with all that, in the last decade, in late 2018, our Director of Aviation, Rosemary Vasiliadis, went to the Clark County Board of County Commissioners and received approval to take the project off of hold and restart our planning efforts. And then in 2019, the airport reached a new record with 51.5 million passengers transiting through McCarran. And when 2020 started, we were well on track to break that record. And as we all know, in March, the effects of the worldwide pandemic kicked in. And as you all know, it brought not only the aviation industry, but our entire economy to a near standstill. But however, on the bright side, as you briefly mentioned, Chris, as expected, these impacts were temporary, and the aviation industry is right on the front edge of that recovery curve, and it's much quicker than initially thought. I mean, if anyone's been through the airport lately, we're back, we're busy. We're not quite back to where we were in 2019 levels, but we're accelerating through that recovery curve. And I expect that we'll be on track to break our record in the near future, and the supplemental airport will still be needed. So we never paused our planning efforts over the past year. We continued them. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Robin and Stephen, who will provide an update on what we've been doing over the past basically two and a half years now, provide some additional background, update where we are currently in our planning efforts, and our projected timeline moving forward. With that, Robin, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and good morning. I'm going to share presentation here. Could you all confirm that you can see my screen, please?
No, we can't see it just yet, Robin. Have you clicked the little share button at the bottom toolbar?
I have.
And then you just choose whichever screen you'd like to share.
One more time.
Thank you.
There, is it up now?
Not yet, but I'm happy to pull up the PowerPoint if you don't mind, Robin.
If you could, I apologize. I don't want to delay anyone's time, and I am clicking the share content button.
No worries. One moment.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Does everyone see my screen? Okay.
Yes, I can see it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jim. Again, good morning to everyone. We appreciate this opportunity to be able to provide the GoEd Working Group with this presentation on the Southern Nevada Supplemental Airport. Today, Jeanette, if you could go to the next slide, we will provide information on our efforts that are underway. The presentation will cover the historical project overview, the current project overview, and the project coordination and engagement that we have underway. And then we'll open it up briefly for discussions and questions from others as a part of this working group who may have those. Our consultant project team is shown on the right. I won't go through all of the names, but Ricondo and Associates is our prime consultant on this planning effort, along with many of the sub-consultants that are listed below as part of the team. And several of these are locally officed here in Las Vegas. With that, I will turn the presentation over to the project manager on our consultant slide. His name is Steve Culberson. He's with Ricondo and Associates, and he will walk us through the presentation. And then right after the presentation, Steve and I will remain available to answer any questions. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm turning it over to Steve.
Thank you, Robin. If you could advance to the next slide, please. So I will go just have a very quick presentation. As Jim discussed at the beginning, planning for this airport has been underway for nearly 20 years. A series of congressional acts designated the Ivanpah Valley as a suitable location for an airport, and subsequent studies have been done that have confirmed that the Ivanpah Valley is the best location for a supplemental airport. Besides the airport site itself, 6,000 acres, which was conveyed to Clark County, other congressional acts have also have reserved 17,000 acres surrounding the airport for compatibility purposes, as well as some areas needed for stormwater retention facilities to help protect the site. Next slide, please. And next slide. So back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, there was a lot of planning that was done. I was part of that effort back then. And why do we need to update the planning today? And basically, we need to bring the airport up to current FAA design standards. We need to look at the changes that have happened in the airline industry, including changes in aircraft types. A lot of the airlines have been retiring some of the smaller regional aircraft and have been upgauging to some of the larger narrow aisle passenger aircraft. And this affects the facilities that are required, and affects some of the separation standards that we need to meet in order to get FAA approval. We're also looking at ways to address some of the project challenges, which we'll talk about in a minute, and also want to make sure that this is an airport for the future. This will be one of since St. George Airport in Utah, this will be the only new airport in the U.S. in quite a number of years. So we want to make sure that when it is constructed, it can accommodate existing and planned technologies and is really forward thinking. Next slide, please. The FAA and the Bureau of Land Management have been designated by Congress as the joint lead agencies to assess the airport and get NEPA clearance. And they have requested a number of studies and information be completed before they start the EIS process. And so that's really what forms our scope of work. And we've broken it down into several groups. Group one is the efforts that we have been undertaking since we were put under contract by the Department of Aviation. We just submitted an updated airport layout plan to FAA earlier this week. And now we're really looking at the capacity of McCarran to try to figure out, how much activity can it reasonably accommodate and still give the desired level of service that the Department of Aviation wants to give to its customers. And then ground access is another major component that we're really focusing on, trying to figure out the best way to get passengers and employees to and from the site. Next slide, please. There you go. Thank you. Just to orient everybody, as Jim said, the airport site is close to the Nevada-California state line between Primm and Jean, and it's just east of I-15. The orange site is the 6,000-acre airport site itself, where the runways and taxiways and terminal areas would be constructed. The dashed line that surrounds the site is the compatibility area, the 17,000 acres that would be conveyed to Clark County once the airport is approved by FAA and BLM. And then the sort of dark blue areas are the retention facilities that are being planned. The gray hatched area that extends north of the airport up towards Sloan, that is a designated transportation utility corridor, and that is specifically being designated for roadways, transits, utilities that are needed to service the airport. Some of the challenges, obviously, are the fact that this is in a very undeveloped portion of the county. You have I-15, but I-15 backs up normally on Sundays and holiday weekends for people going to California, because I-15 in California reduces down to 2 lanes. And so frequently you get a lot of backup. And so we're looking at, how do we maintain access to the airport? How do we get passengers and employees to the airport when I-15 is backed up? What are the other ways that we can get passengers to the airport? And then utilities, there are not major utilities. There's some major distribution lines that go through, but in terms of servicing the site, there's not water or electricity or gas that all needs to be brought down to the site. So these are the things that we're studying right now. Next slide, please. So part of our effort is also a lot of outreach and engagement. We are doing a lot of stakeholder engagement. We are planning ground access transportation workshops later this summer, where we'll be reaching out to stakeholders to present information on the plans to bring passengers and employees to the airport, and seek their input and ideas to make sure that we are considering all aspects as part of the planning efforts. Next slide. There are a multitude of federal, state, and local agencies that have a interest in the project, either from a regulatory perspective or because of the utilities and services that need to be provided. Robin has done a great job of engaging with the county agencies, state agencies. We're meeting with NDOT, as well as Brightline West, the high-speed rail company, on a monthly basis. And we have begun coordinating also with some of the federal agency partners through FAA and BLM. Next slide, please. So this is just a high-level planning schedule showing you where we are in the process. We have about 2 more years of the planning to complete to get through and complete all the information that FAA has requested. And then I think 1 more slide. In terms of a general program schedule, so we are in the planning phase. That'll be completed in about 2 years. And then once that is completed, the environmental effort would begin. We anticipate that will take 2 to 3 years, and then design another 4 years, and then construction 5 to 6 years. So at this point, our planning scenario is we're looking at opening of the airport in about 2035. That is still that's just a very rough estimate at this point. We're still working through a number of the more detailed planning in order to figure out how to get the implementation completed. And I think next slide, I think that is it. So I'll turn it back to Robin for discussion.
Thank you, Steve. And so we want to be cognizant of time, but I believe we have a few minutes to entertain any questions that you all may have or any discussion you'd like to have at this moment. So are there any questions for myself or Steve? Jim is still with us for a little bit. So any questions for Clark County Department of Aviation?
Yeah, if I could ask a question, is that okay, Chris?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. From the compatible land use standpoint, the 17,000 acres, I assume that's going to be part of the planning as well, the airport, what kind of uses will be allowed there and whether or not that land will be on long-term ground leases and or sold for those compatible uses? Question?
Yes, that is part of the planning effort. I'm sure, as you can appreciate, that won't necessarily be totally defined by the end of this time because there would be more discussion that goes into that. But absolutely what that 17,000 acres looks like and will entail what those agreements may look like, that will be part of our planning process. Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Robin or Steve, just a quick question too. In light of the pandemic and as we're starting to emerge from it, what are some of the higher level things that you're thinking about that may change the plan or cause the plan to be adjusted because of the pandemic?
I'll start and then Steve, you can jump in. I think from just a higher level, of course, looking at, as Jim talked about earlier, the air travel demand and how quickly that recovers. We do see a lot of recovery here in Las Vegas, and I think that's happening faster because people are, ready to get out of the house. And then, of course, Las Vegas is a huge attraction. So we do want to ensure that as we finish our forecasting efforts, we would be looking at some adjustments for the short-term forecasting to just make sure it aligns with what has happened as a result of the pandemic. Of course, from an economic standpoint, we want to be, as part of this group, what we are looking at is the direction also that this region is going towards as far as economic diversification. So that is part of what has been included in our plans as well. And we're looking at that as a part of the shift that's happening here now. And then in addition to that, we want to make sure, of course, that from a high level perspective, we consider how we meet the needs from a multimodal perspective, just as Steve talked about. We're looking at the fact that high-speed rail is coming through adjacent to the proposed airport and engaged in meetings with them. We're looking at what technology will look like, not only today, but in the future, right? So once 2035 hits, what are those technologies looking like? How is that shifting? How has some of what we've experienced now may shift what those needs are later? What should our terminals look like as well? How is the result of what we've experienced as part of the pandemic feeding what our future airport planning looks like? So that's part of some of the high level discussions we're beginning to have and some of the thoughts that we imagine and believe will be part of this planning effort. So a little bit, not much of a shift, but it definitely caused the thoughts for further discussion. So whereas we may have been thinking on one stream, because of the pandemic, it causes us, I think, all to think a little bit differently and make sure that we're not just meeting the needs of today, but really meeting the needs of the future, and then understanding that that future, that new normal may shift from what our thinking was back in 2019. And so Steve or Jim, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think what you were saying about the passenger terminals is exactly correct, as well as everything else. But you know, there has been a lot of study about, you know, what can be done to improve or the passenger experience, especially, you know, when you have social distancing measures and all these other things. You know, what does that look like from a terminal perspective? And I think, you know, our fundamental goal is to make sure that whatever we plan is flexible enough to adjust, because we all know, you know, after 9/11 things changed, after COVID things have changed, and we just want to make sure that we're forward thinking enough that we incorporate flexibility into the plans to accommodate whatever technological or regulatory changes happen in the future.
Do we have any other questions?
Just a quick question, Bart Patterson. So I seem to recall McCarran does a fair amount of cargo. And is that going to shift out to the new airport ultimately, or do you know yet what the relative passenger versus cargo flights will be?
We have not made that decision as of yet. So what we have done as part of our forecasting effort is we've looked at several possible combinations. So cargo would be a part of the possible combinations we have looked at, but we have not necessarily gotten to the point where we've specifically decided what will happen and what the shift will be. But it is part of what we're looking at as part of our forecasting effort.
Do we have any additional questions?
Chris, this is Bill Arndt. Question for Robin or the team. Given the heightened interest in infrastructure funding at the federal level, is there an opportunity to expedite the schedule at all with the availability of federal funds? And then a related question, what is, and you may have covered it, I may have missed it, is there a kind of a bright line date of when the environmental process is due to be completed and there's kind of a go, no go approval at the federal level with the environmental?
Okay, so I'll answer that question in two parts, and Steve can absolutely jump in. So I think from a flexibility standpoint, we have the very last slide that Steve shared prior to questions that show that conceptual schedule. Part of that is it's not meant to be linear, right? So some of those tasks may start concurrently, and we did try to leave some flexibility in the schedule. However, you know, a major infrastructure project like this really takes quite a bit of time to plan, to get through the environmental process, to design and construct. So I don't know that we can necessarily shave off a lot of years, but I think our schedule is designed to be flexible. But of course, we do have to do our due diligence. So with that, as Steve said, I'm pretty comfortable with the 2035 timeline that we have, but it doesn't mean that if there's monies available that maybe, you know, we could look at where could we, you know, gain some time in the schedule, that wouldn't be possible, but it is meant to be flexible. So I know I didn't like specifically, but we did try to build a very flexible schedule. But we do want to be cognizant and do our due diligence throughout the process. So we did try to consider that when we built the schedule. There may be opportunities, as I said, through each phase to begin some concurrent processes. So while we're in the planning, there are environmental activities that we may be able to start. Environmental, of course, you generally go through 30% design. So some of your design is taking place during that time. So that may, if monies were to become available, may help us in some case, but we've really tried to design it to be not only flexible, but realistic as well. And then with Brightline, I don't want to speak on behalf of Brightline, although we meet with them monthly. They have received what was considered, to my knowledge, their environmental clearance from FRA. they did what was called a reevaluation. So they did get that from FRA, and they are now in the 106 process. So don't worry, I can't really speak on behalf of them. Their project manager would have to walk you through that process. But we do meet with them monthly to talk through our design and make sure that we meet project needs on the schedule on both sides. But they did receive their reevaluation, I'll use the term clearance, from FRA. I want to say back in September of last year, I believe.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions?
Sure.
All right, James, Robin, and Steve, thank you. We appreciate the information.
Sure.
Sorry, Deputy Director.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Let me ask a question. Apologize. I just wanted to ask from the perspective of some of the state priorities around decarbonization and the state policies on decarbonization, is there consideration in the design to work on reducing emissions both in the airport structures and in the airport operations, like ground gear and that kind of work? And I also just thought, as you were looking at future proofing and thinking about how you move passengers and employees back and forth and reduce that VMT and those vehicles on the road, what kind of transport might be considered in the space of increasing efficiency, increasing range, and decreasing costs in transportation electrification?
Thank you for your question. And with that, I will field that to Steve, who's more of our emissions expert. So I'll ask Steve to chime in on that.
So absolutely, we will be looking at features and design features and just good practices to put into place in terms of both construction and operation. One of the things that we've been looking at, there is quite a bit of fill that's required for the airport. We've been looking at the use of conveyor belts rather than using trucks. And we're continuing to explore other technologies to help reduce not only construction emissions, but also, what happens when the airport operates. The airport industry overall has started to set goals for decarbonization and minimizing aircraft emissions, which is great. And we'll be looking at that as part of the planning for the airport as well.
Thanks. And offline, because I know we're busy, I'd love to just chat with you about embodied carbon in construction as well.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer.
I'd like to thank the team from the airport. We need to move on to our next item to keep us on track here, but I appreciate your time. So number 6, Nevada Treasurer's Office post-legislative update. We have Eric Jimenez, he's Senior Policy Director at the Nevada Treasurer's Office, and I believe the Treasurer may have signed on, so perhaps maybe they both will be presenting today. But I'll turn it over to either the Treasurer or Eric.
Hello, I do not believe the treasurer is here, so I think you all are stuck with me. While I'm not as funny as the treasurer, I do talk for a considerable less amount of time, so you're welcome in advance for that. I'm going to talk a lot about the State Infrastructure Bank today. There was another piece of legislation, Senate Bill 448. But if you want to learn about transmission, I would advise you to talk to our friends at the Governor's Office of Energy. I think they're probably a lot smarter about it than I am. In January, you may recall, the governor was very forward-thinking and I think committed to making sure that this economic recovery was as strong as possible. I know that many people on this call were involved in 2017 on the legislation that established the State Infrastructure Bank. Unfortunately, I think due to the circumstances in Washington and some of the limited nature of the bank, it was never funded and never set up. Thankfully, through the governor's leadership, we were able to work on Senate Bill 430 over the legislative session, which not only expanded the bank to include a variety of types of projects, I think, as we think about modern views on infrastructure, but also dedicated resources to stand this bank up starting July 1. So I think it's really important that we have a conversation today kind of on what we can expect from the State Infrastructure Bank, and I think how some of our local partners can participate in that process. So with the governor's recommended budget in the capital improvement program, there is $75 million in bonding authority that will be issued in the fall when we do our normal bond issuance for all of the capital improvement program. And that will be to set up a revolving fund through the State Infrastructure Bank. So local governments, tribal governments, and nonprofit entities and P3 structures can apply to the bank for loans. And I think now with the deal on infrastructure about an hour ago, I think we're at a very exciting time for the State Infrastructure Bank in making sure that it can serve as a convener in identifying regional priorities for Southern Nevada specifically, and making sure that we're leveraging in every single federal dollar that we can for infrastructure. So we are planning on launching this bank in the next few weeks. It frightens me, but I'm also very excited. And there will also be the hiring of an executive director and the creation of formal working groups to identify projects, vet those projects, and make sure that we can get those off the ground as quickly as possible. With that, you know, we encourage all of our local partners to continue submitting projects to us. Many of you, after the State of the State, I'm seeing some folks from the city of Reno and in Southern Nevada submitted a wide variety of projects. We have a list of hundreds of projects at almost $3 billion right now. So we're going to continue to vet those projects. We have available funding from the federal government at this point for water, sewer, wastewater, through the same types of projects at our state revolving fund. So cleaning and drinking water, broadband connectivity. So I think those are the types of projects you'll see first. But, you know, as projects come up, or if you have needs as local government agencies, we'd love to, you know, make sure that we're having those conversations and seeing if you do need last mile funding or a better interest rate for these projects, that we can get that done. So I know that was a lot at once, but happy to answer any questions if anybody has them. But otherwise, just stay tuned for the things to come with the State Infrastructure Bank.
Thanks, Eric. Do we have any questions?
Chris, this is Jim Lawrence. I have a question, if I could.
Please.
Thanks, Eric, for the information. Yeah, I serve as a deputy director for DCNR. So I guess a couple of quick questions. When you mentioned eligible entities, you didn't mention state agencies. Are state agencies eligible?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. That's helpful. And then, you know, and I think as you're aware, you know, through our Division of Environmental Protection, you know, we do have a, that's also funded through general obligation bonds. We have a program through the Board of Financing Water Projects that gives, that grants dollars for water infrastructure projects as well. If it's not on your radar, I think I'm just putting it on your radar that we probably should communicate and coordinate as you get the infrastructure bank up and running, just to make sure that there's not any duplication, I guess, between the two programs.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a really good point, Jim. And we've been talking with Jason Cooper for a few months now as well. And as Director Swallow is also kind enough to remind me, we don't want to duplicate things that are already moving, but I think how can we be complementary for those projects? So with the American Rescue Plan dollars, one of the eligible uses for those flexible dollars is similar to your clean and drinking water revolving funds. There are essentially grant funds that could be allocated for the same types of eligible projects. So I imagine we'll be talking to NDEP and DCNR about those projects over the next few months to see if there's need and if there are eligible uses for those dollars. So we look forward to making sure that we're always continuing to talk.
That sounds great, Eric. I appreciate that. Yeah, we can just make sure that we can probably get much more done, you know, if we can complement each other as opposed to duplicate. So that sounds great. Look forward to further conversations.
And I know this is very exciting for Mr. Restrepo, since we've been working on this for a long, long time, and it's a rarity in government that we actually get a thing done. So hopefully we don't screw it all up, but we're really excited to get some projects off the ground.
All right. Any last questions? John, do you want to add anything?
Oh, no. Thank you, Eric, for all the hard work. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Thank you for the update. Appreciate that. Tell the treasurer we said hello. Moving on. Sorry. Moving on to item 7, Regional Transit Commission update. We have David Swallow, Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the Regional Transit Commission. David, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Just to confirm, can you see my screen? I'm gonna go in.
Yes, we can see it. It's a little small. I don't know if that's just from my end. Ah, there we go. Yep, full screen. Thank you.
All right. All right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I just want to provide a quick update on all things transportation as far as the RTC is concerned, and kind of talk through what we have planned for the future. Just as a quick reminder, the RTC wears a number of hats. We are the Public Transit Authority for Southern Nevada. We're also the designated metropolitan planning organization responsible for coordinating all the transportation plans between the cities, the county, as well as NDOT and our federal partners. We're the funding agency for streets and highways. We fund a number of roadway projects, again, through the local jurisdictions. We're also responsible for operating the region's traffic management center on behalf of the cities, the county, and NDOT. And finally, we fully support all options, including bicycling, and we operate the public bike share system in downtown Las Vegas. So a quick snapshot of where we are and kind of where we're going in the future. Current population is about 2.3 million. We are looking forward to that hitting about 3 million by the year 2050. I think with some of the growth that we've seen in this past year, surprisingly, and what we see going forward, it might be a little bit faster than that. With that, though, we need to provide the infrastructure for everybody to get around, to get goods and services delivered, both within the metropolitan region as well as coming through interstate travel. With that, we have, I want to say, nearly 7,500 miles of roadway in our metro area. We also operate the public transit system. Our pre-pandemic ridership, I think, was about 65 million. And even with the pandemic and everything shutting down last year, we still transported 56 million trips on our bus system last year. So I think it goes to show just how critical public transportation is to serving the needs of our community. Finally, we've seen 39 million tons of freight move through Southern Nevada, whether it's by rail, by air, by truck, even pipeline. All of those are key considerations to the vibrancy of our community and being able to grow going forward. Quick update on traffic numbers, and I have two curves here. The pink one is where was for last year, 2020. The yellow one is for year 2021. So you can see pre-pandemic level, we just kind of took an average and said, all right, we'll set that at 100%, look at the relative changes in traffic patterns. Right when we get to the declaration by the governor of the COVID being a real issue, and right before shutting down, you can see we're at about 94, 95% of that average traffic level, then precipitously dropped down to a low of 44% there in early April. And then, interestingly enough, as everybody started getting their legs under them and the economy started to open back up, albeit very gradually, we did see the traffic pick up, as you would expect, hovering around 85 to 90% throughout the year before starting to turn upward in December. Unfortunately, we did have another spike in cases, if you recall, earlier this year, but then it kind of dwindled out as we saw the vaccinations roll out. And we're seeing today this, I'm happy to report this last Memorial Day weekend, our traffic was at 118% of what our pre-pandemic levels were. So a lot of movement coming through town. Obviously, we've seen visitors coming back. We're also seeing a lot more interstate traffic in terms of freight movement. And then just people, people moving into town and getting around, getting back to work. As I mentioned, we are the MPO, or Metropolitan Planning Organization for Southern Nevada. With that, that's a federal designation that's required for any community of a certain size, in our case being over 200,000 people. We're required to coordinate all the transportation plans between the cities, the county, bring all those together into a regional plan, our regional transportation plan, and then that feeds into the Nevada DOT's statewide plan. And this is what's required for us to show that we have a comprehensive plan, that and a continuing process for updating it as we go forward. It also shows where we're planning to invest in, whether it's roadways, transit, and other mobility options, and to make sure that we have the funding to do that and doesn't have a negative impact on air quality. All right, I bring this up because we have to look forward. We're constantly looking forward, and we're required to provide what we call our regional transportation plan. This is updated every 4 years, and we just had the RTC board adopted our newest plan in January of this year. So I wanted to bring that to your attention in case you wanted to look at it. Right now, the plan represents, I think we're anticipating close to $30 billion in transportation revenue coming in over the next 30 years. With that, we also have about 200 projects programmed, not using all the funding, but right now that's what we have programmed, from highways to roadways to transit and everything else. And so I encourage you, if you get a chance, to go on our website and take a look at it. One of the key things of that plan is how we're going to make improvements to transit. And in there we have what's called our onboard mobility plan. That focuses on eight big moves, but I want to highlight a couple of them for you. First is to really look at expanding and enhancing our public transportation system to make sure it reaches everyone it needs to, particularly through the metro area, connecting where people live to where they're going, whether it's for jobs, going to the grocery store, going to the doctor, going to school, everybody having the access that they need. Another part of that is looking at high capacity transit, where we want to build bus rapid transit lines, maybe even light rail as we go forward. So the plan is pretty forward thinking, and again, I encourage you to look at it. That being said, where are we at today? As I mentioned, even this past year, we had 56 million trips on our bus system. And I think that goes to show just how necessary public transportation is for everyone to have as part of their daily lives, because not everybody can afford or even has the ability to operate an automobile. So we need to have this type of option available. Not only that, it's absolutely critical to the sustainability of our community. You know, we need to get away from the single occupant vehicle trips, more towards these combined trips. Think of transit as kind of, if you will, like a horizontal elevator that connects the floors of the community together. In addition to our regular buses, what we call a fixed route, we have what's called paratransit. This is for people who are not able to physically or cognitively access our regular system. We certify them and we provide trips to those folks door to door from where they live to where they want to go. In addition to that, we have some specialized services focused towards our senior residents, as well as our veterans, providing free transit service to and from medical appointments for the veterans and their families, and also providing reduced fares for everyone, whether seniors, veterans, or students and kids. One of the critical things that we saw was an immediate impact on our sales tax revenues and our passenger fare revenue last year as the onset of the pandemic took hold. And with that, we were really reeling from the drop in revenue, but still having to provide the same level of transit service. In fact, having to provide more than the demand because we needed to give people enough space to social distance on our buses. So we really tried to keep our service going. But with that, we had to cut back quite a bit. In fact, we cut about $40 million in costs last year, and even furloughed and laid off about 15% of our employment, our employees. And so as we were getting through this with everyone, at the same time, we're enhancing our cleaning procedures and trying to make sure everybody was staying safe on our bus system. Thankfully, the federal government came through with a few tranches of money, whether it was the CARES Act, the CRISA, and then the American Rescue Plan, all together bringing about over $300 million to Southern Nevada to help keep the transit system going and even thriving going forward into the future. To put this into perspective, pre-pandemic, these are some of the deficits that we were looking at. This is when the economy was really doing its best. As you can see here, significant deficits that we were looking at last fiscal year, the current fiscal year, and going forward even worse. Thankfully, with the federal funds, we're able to offset those deficits significantly all the way through fiscal year 27. And so that's giving us the ability to keep the transit service out there. almost bringing it back up to pre-pandemic levels. Not quite, but almost there. In fact, we're next in August, we're planning to implement our new transit service change. We had previously 38 routes that we've been operating. We're going to add 2 new routes to that. One looking at Ann and Tropical across the north side of the valley, and then Cactus and Horizon Ridge around the south part of the valley. And frankly, the southwest part of the valley has been underserved up to now. We're extending our routes to better serve that area, but also introducing what we call microtransit. This is one, if you recall, we had our Trip to Strip pilot program that we looked at. Now we're looking at taking taking what we learned from that and bringing in a new microtransit model for the southwest and south part of the valley. This is where people can hail a transit vehicle to get to the closest transit line to get them to the destinations that they want to go to. And so kind of that door to stop service and vice versa. So when they come in off the bus line from wherever they're coming from, they can hail it and get back to their homes. So this is something we're trying out this year to see how it works, but we anticipate this will be very successful in bringing a much needed service to the community. The other thing we've done is looked at as employers are opening back up their offices and employees are going to and from there, not just offices, obviously the resort corridor, our biggest employer in the valley. You know, one of the things we looked at is how can we encourage people to get back on the transit that they used to use. One of the things is we partnered with over 90 employers to distribute 2 7-day passes to their employees for free. This is one where I think to date, we've distributed somewhere around 26,000 passes for employers to give to their employees. Again, to let them know they can get back on the bus, get to work, and help make those commutes sustainable. Another thing we've done is tried to really improve the accessibility of transit. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it before, but the RTC has an app already that's available on mobile devices called Ride RTC. But if you get on there, there's a number of options you can use to plan your trip. You can see where your bus is going to be in real time, where to pick it up, how long it's going to take you to get to your destination, and then to even buy your bus fare before you get on the bus. Have it on your phone. You can store it there in a basically electronic wallet, if you will. This is a great opportunity. This is a great way for people who are maybe unfamiliar with the bus system to try out, to look at what trip options they have available to them and whether or not those options would work for them. And if they do, they have the convenience of purchasing their fare, storing it on their phone, and then going to the bus without having to touch anything. You just get on, you show, you're done. And even better is we were able to partner with companies like Uber, with another company called Transit App, to allow their customers to purchase transit fares from their own applications. So it's a seamless type experience for anyone. We're also working with Lyft to bring this forward, hopefully this year. One of the other things that we looked at is our public bike share system is now available on the Transit App. So again, you can pay for the bike share on there. We've even gone forward with providing low-income residents an option to get it for even cheaper. The key to our future is really making sure that we focus on clean energy, that we implement sustainable practices, and that we look at mobility options that do not degrade the air quality or to create too much congestion. Key to that is reducing single occupant vehicle trips wherever possible. If you're going somewhere, go with your friend, go with your family. Try to make it a more efficient trip. Also, you don't have to drive everywhere. We talk about riding the bus, but it's not like you have to ride the bus everywhere all the time. Just pick the trips that work best for you. And to that end, we're also looking to, over the past number of years, we've been transitioning our bus fleet away from diesel over to cleaner natural gas buses. In fact, 100% of our paratransit fleet and the majority of our fixed route fleet is already converted. Now we're even going forward with our zero emission vehicle plan. We've received a grant to purchase our first 2 hydrogen fuel cell electric buses. We're also looking to bring in battery electric buses as we go forward. It's an amazing time for us, for everyone in particular, that the battery technology has come so far along, and that we're getting the ranges that we need to see for our buses to be able to operate on the network. And so look for us to begin that transition and I think our current program is looking at over the next 15 years getting to 100% zero emission vehicle fleet. When it comes to roadways, thankfully the community spoke. They supported ballot measures that have given us the roadway funding that we need, and we have that in place today. I just want to highlight we have a few different sources. One is a portion of the sales tax goes to roadway infrastructure, as does the motor vehicle fuel tax. In fact, you have just the regular motor vehicle fuel tax. Then we have if you recall, the fuel revenue indexing that was passed originally by the legislature in 2013, enacted by the county, and started in 2014. And then the voters reaffirmed the support for that in 2016, and that we've been able to carry that forward. To date, we've delivered over 500 projects on that. And then if you look at the kind of what we've put in place, over 540 projects, really focusing not just on our regular contracting community, but really encouraging and seeing support from our small and diverse business community being part of this. Today, we spent about $1.6 billion and somehow have been able to support over 11,000 jobs. Going forward, the RTC board just approved our 10-year capital improvement program, which represents about $2.2 billion in projects over the next 10 years. If you look at the current projects underway, we have over 200 of them representing close to $500 million. And then going forward in 2021, we have over 40 projects in the books that are ready to go out to bid. Once they're awarded, it'll be somewhere around $313 million. So look forward to a lot of that, a lot of the work zones, a lot of cones. And with that, we also have the need for traffic management. Our traffic management team, again, are what we call our FAST team, or Freeway and Arterial System of Transportation. That's our FAST folks that operate the region's traffic management center. Again, on behalf of the cities in the county who have the purview over the roadways and all the rights of way and the traffic signals, we work with them to do signal coordination, as well as to look at how to mitigate impacts from incidents and to plan future improvements. If you look at our FAST team, right now we have close to 1,600 signalized intersections on our network that they're able to tap into from our main traffic management center. We work to retime those as traffic patterns change. We look to retime those to get as much efficiency as we can out of them. In addition to that, we have over 4,000 intelligent transportation system, or ITS, devices. This includes I want to say somewhere around 900 cameras. There's like 600 something flow detectors. I mean, this is everything from the freeways to the arterials to the dynamic message signs you see on the freeways advising you of the travel time, or if there's an incident up ahead, or the active traffic management signs that NDOT had put into place on I-15 and 95. All of these are coming into our main traffic management center, and our FAST team is working to try to mitigate the impacts of congestion as much as possible, to make sure our first responders are aware of and can get to incidents as quickly as possible, and improve the health and safety of everyone. Sorry. With that incident management, we've taken it to the next level. We partnered with a company called Waycare, who uses they collect and aggregate big data. They put that data into a platform we use at our traffic management center to recognize, using artificial intelligence, to recognize where there's incidents occurring, and we're getting notified them before the first person ever calls. I mean, multiple minutes before someone even calls in. So we're able to see it. We're able to pin down those incidents via our cameras, and then advise law enforcement and our other first responders how best to get to them. As I mentioned, NDOT has the active traffic management signs that went into place. I think there's somewhere around 42 of them, if I remember correctly, along I-15 and some on 95. I know the state DOT is looking to expand these systems going forward. Part of that is including how to better smooth out the traffic with speed harmonization, but also, as you can see here, if there's an incident up ahead and one of the lanes is blocked, we're giving you forward notice of that so you can move around it and hopefully avoid any secondary crashes. It's one thing to have a bumper-to-bumper incident. It's another thing to have the looky-loos going by, also getting into a crash. And so we're hoping by helping smooth out the traffic on the freeways, we can avoid those types of incidents. Finally, one of the other innovative things we did this year was this past year is implement an adaptive signal control technology at a number of signals along Eastern Avenue, about 14 signals altogether from Pebble Road South to Beckler. What we looked at is, instead of our traditional time of day plans, so you might have an AM peak hour time of day plan, a midday, a PM peak hour, and then kind of our off-peak or weekend time of day plans. So it's setting up signal timing as best as we can based on how we think the traffic's going to move. This just took it way into the next level to say at every second, looking at the traffic coming into each of these intersections and readjusting the timing as much as possible to best serve everybody while still preserving that signal coordination that we like to see, because we get a lot more cars through there. The results are pretty impressive when we look at the time savings and the unburned fuel and all that. It paid for itself. I think the project cost about $900,000. It paid for itself in just over 30 days. So this was a very good, successful implementation. And now we're looking at, okay, going forward, what corridors make the most sense to implement similar technology on, and to kind of prioritize with the jurisdictions on how to implement these going forward. And with that, please check out our website, and I'm available to answer any questions.
You have any questions for David? All right, well, thank you, David. Appreciate the update.
Okay, thanks.
So moving on to item number 8, Apex update with Dave Brown, president of Land Develop Associates. Dave, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
Get to my PowerPoint here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So good morning. My name is David Brown, and we appreciate the ability to present here today and give you an update on Apex. As you see the quote from Mayor John Lee, when he first heard about Apex, he just thought it was an ugly name. And we heard that time and time again from brokers in the community, site selectors from out of the community, and numerous other people that were affiliated with the Southern Nevada community. Who am I? I'm president of Land Development Associates. My background is a civil engineer. I started my civil engineering career in Northern Nevada and worked on the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, where you have numerous different developments, including Tesla, Walmart, Switch. It's been a very successful industrial center, so I was blessed to be a part of that in the start of my career. Started being a land developer in Southern Nevada in 2004. Been with Apex since 2007. And Lisa Cole, my partner, and I formed Land Development Associates with the parent company LDA Development Services in 2010. Lisa Cole, who's also on this call and will pick up my slack on some of these tougher questions. She joined Apex in 2001. Her background is environmental science. She's a master in water rights and BLM permitting, thankfully, since those two are my weaknesses. But I'm sure the first question that comes to your mind is, you've been at Apex since 2007, your partner's been there since 2001. What the hell have you been doing? And we'll get to that today, but the easy answer is grinding, and you'll see what we've been working on. History of Apex. Some of you might remember the Pepcon explosion, May 4th, 1988. That set forth a need for industrial land away from residential centers in Southern Nevada. And so Public Law 10167 was created, and that was what we refer to as the Apex Land Act, which set aside roughly 18,000 acres for development of industrial services. Kerr-McGee, Georgia Pacific, Papco, and Kim Lime were largely the only developments out there outside of some NV Energy and third-party power plants in Apex. Originally, all this land was owned by the federal government, the BLM, and they turned it over to the county to be the master developer of Apex. The county did several studies, started the development process, and then quickly learned that this was better left to private developers, which I'm not sure was such a good decision either for a while. Apex Holding Company purchased most of the property outside of the Kerr-McGee, Georgia Pacific, Pabco, and Kimlime in 2000. And there was minimal other development. And here you can kind of see the map of Apex. Largely it's empty desert, right? You had Kerr-McGee had 3,200 acres, and they had 350 acres of that developed, with the remaining being a blast zone to prevent a Pabco type or a Pepcon type catastrophe. Yeah, Love's Truck Stop has since gone in, but you still have just barren desert out there mostly. What are the impediments to development, and why has this sat so long? There was no master developer. Like I said earlier, Apex Holding Company purchased this property, but they purchased it on a flip. They thought they would buy the property in 2000, be out by 2004, and make tons of money, and that obviously didn't happen. Lack of utilities. There's no distributable power out there, or little distributable power out there. You go out there, you'll see 3 large peaking power plants, and also hundreds of miles of overhead power. However, all that power is at 250 kilovolts or above, and these industrial users need anywhere from 12.47, which is a lot less, or 480 volt power. And so we need substations constructed, and that was one of the impediments to development out there. And then no sustainable water source. We do have groundwater wells out there that were sustaining Kerr-McGee and these other projects, but there's no surface water system. So that's a big impediment to development. Bureau of Land Management, and I'll jump forward to a slide here to show you. The BLM, when they transferred this over to Clark County through that Apex Land Act, set aside these crosshatched areas that bisect Apex as transportation utility corridors for the purpose of promoting development out there, so that we could get power, water, sewer, rail, all those through these. But unfortunately, they left it under the purview of the federal government, which has been a huge detriment to us. Permitting timeframes are anywhere from 24 to 36 months, which obviously doesn't align with the speed of development, and so it's been tough impediment to development. And then up until today, there's been other more economical land options. You could buy land at the Speedway for roughly $6 a foot in the not too distant past. There have been successful developments out there that we've worked on in the Kerr-McGee area, which is an area called Capex LLC. Purchased that from Kerr-McGee back in 2006. They were able to develop a couple of solar fields under power purchase agreements with NV Energy. So those are both 20 megawatt facilities, roughly 150 acres each, developed by Photo Audio Nextera. I think their power purchase agreements were at 13 cents and 10 cents a kilowatt hour, respectively. Those have since dropped down to less than 3 cents. And so solar field development on private land has become obsolete. Love's Truck Stop has their most successful truck stop out there at the intersection of I-15 and Highway 93. That's their most successful truck stop in the nation, which is mind-blowing to me. And then marijuana grows. Back in the marijuana boom in 2014, the Mayor Lee set forth this is called a green zone, and wanted to entice marijuana growers to go out there. And so we were bombarded with 10 to 20 marijuana growers that wanted to purchase property out there. However, the lack of usable infrastructure crushed that industry, and now we've ended up with about 2 growers out there that have been able to survive. And a couple of businesses have occupied the existing Kerr-McGee buildings since Kerr-McGee vacated. And so they're successful out there. And obviously the Hyperloop, which was a huge win for Apex, is still operating out there in the northwest portion of Apex. And of course, our favorite failure out in Apex is Faraday Future. And Lisa and I spent a lot of time with Verity Futures, their development consultant, and it was quite a deflating experience when they went defunct. What's happening now? So now, after all the depressing news we've dropped on you, we've got exciting stuff happening now, which is probably the real reason I'm here. Weston Adams, who purchased about 320 acres in the southern part of Apex, became a master developer of that 320 acres, that first phase of Apex. It's at the very southern edge of Apex, which I'll jump forward to another slide here. Down here in the southern edge of Apex, which, to give you some context, the Speedway's here, and it's about 2.5 miles northeast of the Speedway. So he bought that land. Let me go back to my slide. And then structured an oversized water agreement with the city of North Las Vegas. What that entails is he was going to bring an 8-inch water line to his property at 320 acres in order to develop only his 320 acres. And the city and the mayor and their team, having the foresight to see past that 320 acres, wanted to oversize that. And the oversized water line is anywhere from 24 to 36 inches and will serve the southern 2/3 of Apex. And that consists of 5 miles of water line. This again is the Speedway, which I showed you on that earlier slide. The first phase is 5 miles of water line up to the I-15 Las Vegas Boulevard interchange. If you're familiar with the area, it's basically where Ritchie Brothers is on the east side of the I-15. And that 5 miles of pipeline is backfilled. We've got 2 pump stations on there and 2 tanks, and that will be turned over to the city in the next couple of weeks. So that's a huge win for both us and the city. The second phase of the water line, which is another 4.5 miles and goes up to the central part of Apex, that is in design now. It's at 99% design level. We expect to begin construction on that second phase of water line within the next 30 days. And so that will service another 2,000 or so acres within Apex. Also, sewer infrastructure, which is important. If we're bringing surface water out there, it comes from the lake. We want to take that water back to the lake and get return flow credits and use that water again. We want to use that water over and over again. Obviously, in the news is how the lake is lowering, but if we can put 75% to 80% of what we're using down and put down into a facility, put down the drain and get back to the lake, then we can create sustainable development. And so that sewer line is important. It generally goes from that southern part of Apex, which I was talking about, the Miners Mesa property, down past the Speedway, underneath the I-15, over to Mount Hood and Tropical. This project is funded purely by private development and no oversight with the city of North Las Vegas. Also, we talked about lack of distributable power. NV Energy has been a perfect partner for us out there, and I'm not just saying that because Brigger's on the line. They have really been a perfect partner for us. They are putting in Prospector Substation, and that is being funded 100% by NV Energy due to the amount of new connections that will connect to that substation. Also, we're putting in several miles of lower kV power line so that we can get the distributable power to the customers. And also gas is being designed out there right now and installed to Miners Mesa and other parts of the park. And Cox Communication has partnered right alongside of us also, and they are installing their fiber line along the entirety of this water line. So as we move along with the construction, they're moving along with us and putting conduit in that will serve fiber to all these users within Apex. What is the impact of all this infrastructure? First of all, Lisa and I have something to look forward to coming to work every day instead of just looking at the barren dirt. But you can see what the impact has been. This map shows, you remember the barren desert before, this impact shows all the users now that have either closed on property and are starting construction on their facilities or are in escrow right now and pursuing their due diligence. we've got, I'll just point out some of these, Air Liquide, which is a hydrogen fuel cell plant. We've got Dermody, which is, they're doing distribution spec buildings. Kroger's a big one. They are doing cold storage facility out there at about 1.5 million square feet. Project Quartz is a Fortune 300 manufacturer, which will be a great announcement, and they are moving quickly through their due diligence and hired engineers and are hiring a contractor to start construction of their facility. That was all of phase one. So that 320 acres that I told you Mr. Adams purchased has already been spoken for within about an 18-month time frame that all absorbed. He purchased another 1,000 acres more or less up here in the central part of Apex. And you can see the red are both, those two parcels are both 50 acres, and that's all we have left for marketing purposes. And we've been sitting on those, and the reason they're still left is because they have some elevation issues to deal with. And so we've got to lower those before we can put those on the market. So we have nothing left absolutely to sell in that 1,300 acres in about 24 months, which is astounding. And like I've already said, this impacts to the infrastructure we talked about already. 4 million square feet of new distribution is what will be out there here within the next 24 months. What's on the horizon? So we still have about 4,000 acres left to develop in Apex. 3,000 of those, or 3,300 of those, are in northern Apex. And we'll get to how utilities get to northern Apex shortly here. Then Black Mountain is the east side of Apex. I'll jump to this. The northern part of Apex I was talking about, which is Garnet Valley, is up in this area. And Black Mountain, which is eastern Apex, is off just above the Nellis Dunes on the east side of the map here. And so we've had potential for big users, just announcing this. Google, Facebook, Kohler have all been out here and either are in escrow on land or looked at land and passed on land. And those are all in the northern part, Garnet Valley part of Apex. We have no doubt that once utilities are delivered to that part, that will be absorbed fairly quickly. The Faraday Future property was picked up by H&R REIT. Kevin Keating is the manager of that property. And we expect big things from Kevin and that Faraday Future property, which is about 930 acres of that 3,000 in Garnet Valley. Another really exciting news, well, exciting to an engineer, the SNWA Garnet Valley and sewer infrastructure. SNWA set aside $250 million for investment in Apex. That will bring both water transmission out to the Garnet Valley, which is that northern 3,000 acres. And more importantly, it'll bring sewer back to the city of North Las Vegas treatment plant. So they are going to, the first phase is they're bringing this water out all the way from Lamb and 215 or Pecos and 215, all the way up to that northern part of Apex. It'll terminate in two storage tanks here, or 4 bays, what they're being called, and then the third 4 bay up in the northern part of Apex, and that will make it instead of just being a transmission line, it'll be able to be used for distribution. And you can see 18 miles of pipeline, a 4 million gallon reservoir, 3 pumping stations, and 3 4 bays. The sewer, and we're looking right here at a Pogemeyer master plan of the sewer that touch these black lines touch every part of Apex. So over 43 miles of wastewater pipeline from 18 to 48 inches will service all of Apex and bring that surface water back to the treatment plant and eventually back to the lake. And so once water and sewer up here, the only thing we have left is power. And working with MB Energy, we're addressing future substation locations and also how to get distributable power out of the existing gypsum substation, which still has quite a bit of capacity left into it, and get that up to this northern part of the park. The eastern part of the park, which I spoke about before, is going to be further on the horizon. And I know NDOT is doing some improvements up to this area of the park. The one thing we're missing is the access to the east side of the freeway. So there'll likely have to be an interchange planned here in order to get to that last 1,000 acres of apex. So John Lee in that same newspaper article says, you know, he doesn't just see the vacant land as opportunity. He says it's the only way to save North Las Vegas. And he's been instrumental, absolutely instrumental in setting this up and working with us in order to make timeframes for these end users and commitments to these end users, and also to partner with Weston Adams on bringing that infrastructure out to Apex. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. I know there's a whole bunch of information I missed, so if you have any specific questions on Apex, I'm here to answer it.
Thanks, Dave. Do we have any questions from the working group members? All right. I can't see everybody, but I think that's a no. So thanks, Dave. Appreciate the updated information.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item number 9. That's RCG Economics. And this is John Restrepo, an update on our working group interviews and summary. John, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'll make go through this pretty quickly. We're in the process of finalizing a presentation of today's comments that I'm going to make. It'll be posted on the GoEd website. What Chris asked me to do today is just kind of do a quick overview. I know everyone's really busy on kind of the general findings from our one-on-one meetings. We've held one-on-one meetings with most of the folks in the working group. I want to thank those who have participated with us for the generosity of time and information they gave us. It was really, really valuable. So I wanted to say thank you to start with. Kind of the main themes that we were working on the one-on-ones was the issue of infrastructure, obviously, that's the core topic we've been dealing with all these months, but also the questions of the relationship between infrastructure and economic development. And within the infrastructure space, how do we also define traditional and non-traditional infrastructure? What should it include? And how do we look at the built environment, also the socioeconomic environment, as all part of kind of a larger picture of infrastructure, including issues like diversity and equity and inclusion as part of our economic development goals. So with the beginning in mind, as Chris has often says to me, as what are some of the opportunities we're seeing? Well, we know Southern Nevada's a blank slate in many ways. It doesn't have the burdens of old infrastructure and legacy cities, and that are very aged. So we were in good shape in terms of being a relatively new city, and compared to other cities. So we have that for it. So a lot of things don't have to be torn down and rebuilt. There's a lot of greenfield related infrastructure that we can do here. We did hear a challenge that came up multiple times in our interviews, but it's an opportunity as well and that's how do we move from siloed work environments between agencies and groups and special interests into a more unified approach to infrastructure, whether it's air, water, power, whatever it may be, roadways. How do we coordinate that better for implementation purposes, for investment purposes, and how do we better collaborate with the private and public sectors? We also know that we have to be, at least folks have said, that we need to grow by being proactive rather than reactive. That includes incentives for certain types of industries. What kind of companies should we recruit in the context of our natural resource base, particularly water and air and all these other things. So these coordinations between infrastructure and economic development, business retention and attraction came up quite a few times. Also, too, how do we spend the federal money that's coming? Whether it's the rescue plan money or the Jobs Act money. How do we do it in a big way? And that's spend the money in smaller projects, but really meaningful strategic projects, as well as not duplicating efforts that are already being done. So it's, again, requiring quite a bit of coordination. And how do we employ better planning models and impact analysis and more rigorous timelines to move these things forward? That will require, we think, something that should be considered probably at the state level, and that is some type of bipartisan private-public commission or independent group tasked with planning and decision-making relative to regional infrastructure strategies, including what do we define as infrastructure. So there may be some type of, not to put too fine a point on it, if you guys remember years ago, the BRAC commission that the feds put together to decide what military bases would stay open, which stay closed, and which they would invest in. it became kind of a nonpartisan independent group that did that. So something like that maybe something should be considered, both between the government sector and the private sector. As always, with all things Southern Nevada, we heard that from the guys at the airport, the folks at the airport. The federal government plays a huge role in this. How we deal with this? How do we work with the federal government to make their processes? And Dave touched on this earlier. Quicker. How can we get these things done a little quicker? What can we do legislative wise in Washington to move some of this forward? So that was an issue that came up. The issue of, as part of that, the issue is what does it mean to be a resilient economy? Is it just about infrastructure? Is it just about land, which I harp on about all the time? Or is it also the human infrastructure? And what are we doing in terms of our workforce? And so there's issues that came up during these meetings of the skill level of our workforce, the size of our workforce, the educational system, which we talk about, all of us ad nauseum, and how do we train the workers of the future, particularly for jobs that are not automatable, which is the other issue that came up a number of times, is where we're heading in terms of AI, automation, and robotics, and how that's going to affect the workforce of the future. We also talked about, some of the folks brought up the issue of brain drain. We train all these people at CSN or UNLV, and because of the lack of job opportunities here, we end up training them, they end up moving to California or Texas or Arizona, wherever they go to take those jobs. So we have this brain drain issue, which ties into both business attraction questions and questions of how we're going to grow and become more resilient. Underlying all of this also is the issue, as I mentioned earlier, the issue of natural resources, the water question that comes up periodically, because we all know, and the Water Authority does an incredible job managing this process, but how do we continue to pay attention to that and have it a focus of our economic development efforts, making sure we give the water folks a prominent role in helping decide what businesses we want to come here and to expand. So that's a big issue that came up multiple times. Permitting, utility permitting of development, permitting of utilities. How do we remove barriers that may be out there if we have barriers? How do we become our permitting process more streamlined as best we can to move projects for particularly infrastructure projects, public projects like this, and looking at the cost of those of that permitting process. Also, too, that came up several times is the importance of the Ivanpah Valley and the airport down there, and how do we move forward with providing all the necessary utilities as quickly as possible. It is a little bit disconcerting because of the process, and it's nothing we can do about this, that we may be talking about a 14 to 15 year process to have Ivanpah operational along with the compatible land uses around it. And as you know, the economy does not work that slow. The economy works in a different speed, and companies make big decisions on where they're going to relocate based on the market forces, not necessarily federal government regulatory practices. And so there is a challenge that we're facing, as I've said many times before, as I keep repeating, what are we going to do about our land shortage situation? So that's something that comes into play, and it makes it even worse when we have situations where it takes a long time to get infrastructure built because of federal regulations and government policies, for example. Mobility came up quite a bit. Speaking about transportation and that sort of thing, in terms of NDOT indicates that there may be a $530 million budget shortfall. We have to have greater equity in our mobility in terms of transit to colleges, to keep people to get to school, better mobility in terms of getting people out of their cars, as Dave Swallow said, and into our transit system. What can we do about I-15, if anything, to improve connectivity to Southern California? As you know, guys know, the 5th largest economy in the world, and we're essentially a business suburb of that area. What do we need to do there? How do we build, and where do we build I-11? There's different routes for the I-11. Some have more economic development impacts than others. Is it a bypass or is it an economic development driver? That was discussed. As I mentioned earlier, the issue of transit to universities, college, and large employment centers came up quite a bit. The EVs, how is that going to affect our transportation funding and planning as we move more and more for electric vehicles? How is that going to affect the size of roadways, access, who should be paying for the charging stations, where they should be put? That's considered infrastructure on private property or in public areas. How is that going to happen? How is that going to work? Should it be done at home, on homes only, or businesses? Should businesses have to pay for EV stations? This is all part of this EV electrification kind of network system. Kind of wrapping up right now in terms of diversity and inclusion. There is some challenges, as you guys know, here in Southern Nevada. We have a large share of our workers are low skill, low wage workers. We do have a wealth and income problem here in Southern Nevada. It's been around for many years. I think the pandemic, first it started with the Great Recession, exposed some of that, the pandemic, and accelerated the issue of understanding what are we doing in terms of equity in our workforce and the types of infrastructure that has to be built. And when I say built, I use in the broader sense, sort of where, let's say, invested in to bring about that equity. It goes beyond just physical infrastructure. How do we train our workers through the community college system is an important issue. The issue of broadband and Wi-Fi. If we're going to be in a world where people are going to be working remotely, or a portion of our population either studying remotely or working remotely, and we have to go into the more rural areas, how do we improve broadband connectivity and have that as part of our critical infrastructure? I'm glad to see that the feds are going to be investing in that, and hopefully we can use some of the dollars that we get from the feds to do that. That's why the treasurer's office is doing is so important. And then kind of finally, the whole issue of housing. Well, two things. Housing is a big debate right now, as you guys know, around the country by economists and elected officials and analysts. Is housing and affordable housing a piece of a critical infrastructure? If it is, then we have to look at that as that way. It is. We know from the economic development space that affordable housing is a key component in companies being attracted to the areas. The issue of a job force, what do you call it, jobs housing balance is critical. The ability to house workers is really important, whether it's rental housing or for sale housing. So this issue of affordable housing as a piece of the infrastructure picture is maybe something we need to look at based on the comments we got from the folks in the working group. It's just as I mentioned before, we need to have a more expansive definition of infrastructure. And then finally, on the issues of conservation and the environment, it's all related together. You cannot have a healthy economy without a healthy environment. As I've said before, you can't have a healthy environment without a healthy economy. But how do we balance that with our natural resource constraints and with climate change, with the warming, the issue of urban reforestation as a way to stymie some of this heat effect we have in Southern Nevada as part of an infrastructure picture? And what do we need to do to continue evolving in technology in our conservation efforts and in our protection of the environment, while at the same time providing a quality of life needed by our residents in the context of a more resilient economy? So that's basically it right now. So it's these are nothing new. These discussions, I've been here 30 years. I've been hearing them for 25 years. But I think this time around there's a real case to be made that if not now, when do we provide a united front to address some of these major issues that we're being faced with, both on the human infrastructure side and on the physical infrastructure side, within the context of natural resource limitations and protecting the environment. And that's kind of my comments for today, Chris. I'm open to any questions.
Thanks, John. Do we have any questions? All right, seeing none. So again, John, appreciate that, and I appreciate all of you for the feedback. As John indicated, these points that he's raised are all from the conversations. And moving forward, what we'll do is we'll aggregate those with the comments and the presentations that the presenters that we've had over the last 6 months. And again, we'll have a comprehensive report that we will get out in September. And we'll have potentially, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about timelines, but yeah, by the end of September. Okay, so moving on to item number 10, working group member comments. Are there any comments from the group? Okay, and then item number 11, are there any items for the next agenda for the meeting that will be in July? Is there any area that any working group members feel like we need to revisit, something we've not covered that we need to incorporate into the agenda?
Hey, Chris, it may be worth checking back on the in the federal infrastructure bill, since there was just an announcement that the White House is supporting the framework from the bipartisan discussions that have been ongoing.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Do we have any other suggestions for the next meeting? And if you think of anything post-meeting, please don't hesitate to shoot an email to myself and Jeanette. Thanks again for that. Moving on to item 12, Jeanette, can you please facilitate our public comment?
Yes, this is Jeanette Hogan for the record. Does anyone wish to give public comment at this time? If so, you will be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask that you state your name clearly for the record.
Yes, good morning.
Hi, Mr. Evans. Go ahead and proceed with your comments. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. For the record, Ken Evans, President, Urban Chamber of Commerce. Very glad that I was able to attend today again. Definitely appreciated all the presentations, a lot of great information there in 2 respects. Number one, it provides information that our small, diverse businesses can use to strategize and hopefully participate in these future opportunities. And then number two, to that point, I would hope in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we figure out a way for businesses like those that are represented in our urban chamber membership to participate in these forward-looking opportunities by getting them the information now so that they can develop the relationships or relationships, as my board chair, Shondell Newsom, likes to say, so that over the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years, they'll already be positioned to participate in these wonderful, very promising opportunities. But again, great presentations today, and appreciate the opportunity to participate, listen, and learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Does anyone else wish to give public comment at this time? Okay, no one online, no one on the phone, and nothing written was submitted, Chris.
Great, thank you, Jeanette. So moving on to item 13, adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion. This is Doa.
Thanks, Doa. Do we have a second?
I'll second. It's Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer. Apologize, we ran about 8 minutes over schedule, but appreciate all of your time again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.